Do you hate it when your children argue and fight? You can learn how to stop it right now. Are you not like crazy tired of all that screeching noise as kids argue, fight, and compete over the most ridiculous things? Are you tired of hearing demands and accusations like these? Stop it. I wanted to sit there. That's mine. You touched me first. It's my turn. I wanted that. You ate all the cookies. Give me that. Stop doing that. Shut up. You're stupid. That's not fair. Sound familiar? Kids argue so often that it becomes like a normal background noise, and we tend to just tune it out. But all the while, the arguing and the fighting are causing horrifying damage to our children. So what's the harm? Every second they argue, they're hearing your silent agreement that fighting is okay. They learn that anger and conflict are how you get your way in life. Over a lifetime, that belief causes terrible pain and failed relationships. The tension of their arguments fills the house and drives out all possibility of joy. Studies show that children raised in a house with contention are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, decreased brain function, if you can believe it, problems in school, relationship problems, eating disorders, substance abuse, and even physical health problems. Is that what you want for your kids? No. They feel less connected to you and more alone when they argue and fight. Anger generates stress and tension, which eliminates the possibility of their feeling your love. And that love is what they need most. It's emotionally crippling for a child. Their sense of entitlement grows. The more they argue, the more they feel entitled to argue. And in very little time, their entitlement makes productive interactions with them impossible. As they continue arguing and fighting with each other, they also become more skilled and prepared to turn their fighting skills on you. Now, how can you stop your children from arguing and fighting immediately? You are moments away from these simple but effective steps, but first you need the foundation that must be in place before the steps can work. First part of the foundation, kindness and love. When they argue and fight, your children are not being bad. They're just in emotional pain. And they're only using the social skills they've learned to protect themselves, usually learned from you. If you're irritated as you address their arguing, you will add to their pain and make things worse. Second part of the foundation, immediate. The arguing and fighting have to stop right now. There can be no half measures with these behaviors. Arguing and fighting cannot continue if you stop it from even beginning. I'll show you how. So you have to take action within 3 to 5 seconds of hearing any whining or crying or arguing or fighting or anything like it. Third part of the foundation, consistency. You have to act every time you hear arguing or fighting, or your inconsistency will seriously confuse your child. Now, finally, the steps that will stop the arguing and fighting immediately. Step 1, love them. This almost seems counterintuitive. When children are arguing and fighting, they rarely seem adorable. But remember this, underline it in your head. The whole reason children fight is that they feel like they're not being listened to and that somebody isn't caring about them. This is emotionally very painful to them. So they protect themselves by raising their voices, both physically and emotionally. And that's when simple disagreement, which is not a problem, becomes anger, arguing, and fighting, which are problems. Anger is a way of getting attention and protecting themselves. It's all they know to do. Just telling them to stop fighting is useless. When you remember that they truly do not understand how to behave more productively, just as most adults do not, you become much more compassionate and less likely to be irritated at them. If you are the slightest bit annoyed with them as you respond to them, they will feel threatened and unloved, and they will likely defend themselves with even more arguing and fighting. In short, there can be no anger from you toward them, ever, and we'll talk more about that later. Step 2, listen. The most immediate and powerful way you can communicate that you love your children is to genuinely listen. While they're arguing and fighting, get their attention so they can see that you're not trying to control them, but are trying to genuinely listen to them. Without anger, that can be very endearing to a child. Now, how do you get their attention? Hold up your hand. Speak softly. Softly. Look them straight in the eye, which creates a measure of intimacy that is immediate. Touch them. Hold their hand. Now, ask them what they want. Yes, I know, they're already screaming what they want, but listen more closely. What they're really doing is aggressively demanding, not genuinely asking, so the other child is forced to defend rather than listen. They're mutually accusing each other of some crime. That will never get them what they want, and certainly not the love and respect they want most. They're not listening. They're screaming what they want, but because they're not listening, the other child increases their own volume in order to be heard. Two screaming children never get what they want, and nobody is happy. You can change all that when you turn to one child and ask, what do you want here? What do you want now? Keep going until the child can express it in one simple sentence. Stop them when they say what the other child is doing wrong. No, you're asking what the child wants. This requires the child to focus on a positive goal, something they want, instead of attacking the other child. Then you have the same interaction with the other child. Step 3. Teach. Prepare them first to be taught. Gesture toward yourself with your hands and say, look at me. Listen to me. Softly but firmly. It's not a request. If you're tentative, or if you indicate any degree of impatience with their behavior, you will only inflame the situation. I repeat, you cannot be angry. None, or you'll just add to the fighting. You just become another fighting child. So what exactly can you teach? You could say something like this, in this order, quote, what we all want most when we talk with someone is to know that they care about us, which is another way of saying that they love us. That is our number one wish. Continuing the quote, disagreement is not the problem. But when you add anger to the mix, then you have arguing and fighting and everybody loses. So there will be a new rule in this house. And I will keep the rule too. I have not been keeping this rule, which is my mistake. Here's the rule. Continuing to quote. You can talk about whatever you want. You can disagree, but there will be no more anger expressed toward each other ever. We're done with it. Now, if you don't know what to do with your anger, come and talk to me. But never express your anger at your brother or sister. Never. Why? Because it never works. Never. It destroys what I just said we want most, to know that someone cares about us, listens to us, loves us. End quote. You might mimic their sounds and words of anger, the whining, the victimhood, and all that. You know the sounds. Briefly and without mocking. Then you say to them, in the middle of all that noise that I just made, will anybody feel loved? Will any disagreements be really solved? End quote. And they will always answer no, or at the very least, they'll shake their head or drop their head in resigned agreement and possibly even embarrassment. It tends to really take the heat out of the conversation. Now, give them a chance to solve the argument. For example, to pick just one of infinite possibilities. You might say, quote, you, child A, want to play with this toy. You, child B, want to play with the same toy. What you don't know is that you can both have what you want. Really, end quote. Now, you say, quote, I'm going to leave the room for 5 minutes and you two will work on how you can make this happen so that you're both happy with it. Both happy. Keep in mind that if you can't solve this on your own, I will get involved. No threat here. I will just get involved and you might not like my solution. End quote. Then you leave the room for 5 minutes as promised. Then we get to step 4. Explain, which is still more teaching. When you return, if they have worked out an agreement, which is not uncommon and so much easier without anger, well then, hallelujah, the angels sing. This is a big moment because you have just established the fact that arguing and fighting can stop immediately. You've proven that it can be done. That matters because what we can do once, we can do again. Then we can do it for longer periods. And then it can become a habit. Wow, what would that be like? But what if they're still arguing and fighting when you come back in 5 minutes? Well, now you get more involved. You explain and teach more. Now, because they have failed to solve the conflict, you will offer some options. You will not stop or solve the conflict. You'll just teach them more, explain, and give them more information so that hopefully they can solve this. So let's look at an example. 2 kids are fighting over who gets to play with a toy, just one instance. You've heard it all. It's mine. I had it first. Stop it. Give it back. That's not fair. I'm telling mom. This is accompanied by shouting, screaming, name calling, sometimes hitting and then wrestling over the toy on the floor. And you say, quote, I gave you a chance to work this out. You didn't. So now I will make some suggestions, end quote. Then you offer some choices that they haven't seen, but you leave them to choose. You might say, for example, these are just examples, you can come up with your own. You, it's the first choice, you, child A, could use the toy first for, say, 20 minutes, make up your own number. And then you, child B, get to play with it after those 20 minutes for as long as you want. The idea here, kind of a clever trick actually, is that one child gets the first use of the toy, which they both want, and the second child gets to use the toy longer, which they both want. A tough choice for most children. Second possibility that you give to them to consider. I will take the toy and put it away so neither of you can use it. Then you can both find something else to play with. You proposing ideas sometimes gets their creativity flowing, and they might come up with a modification of your idea, or motivated by your second choice, taking the toy, they might come up with something entirely different. If they refuse to agree, they keep fighting, you move to step 5. Remove the fuel. Kids only repeat a behavior if they get something from it, some kind of reward. With arguing and fighting, there are many rewards, which are the fuel for the fire of their conflict. They get power. They get to feel right, self-righteous. They get to feel stronger than somebody else, and more. The list goes on and on. In many respects, they actually enjoy the fighting. It makes them feel more alive, or at the very least, less helpless and weak. But arguments can't survive without the anger that fuels them. You can't make children agree, but you can remove the fuel. How do you do that? First, by loving them. Your love puts a wet blanket on the fire. And you could say, quote, I've decided that the highest goal of this family is to be happy. Arguing and fighting don't lead to happiness, so we're going to eliminate this argument and give you a chance to learn something from it. End quote. You're not doing this to stop the argument. That's not the goal. You're doing this to remove the fuel and the fire of the moment so you can see if they can calm down enough to learn how to handle a disagreement instead of arguing. So you continue, quote, "You can both go to separate rooms now and stay there until you're ready to solve this problem without any fighting. Just until then. When you're ready, you can come and find me," end quote. In most cases, only a few minutes pass before they want to talk to you again. If they solve the problem then, great, you're done. If they don't, you return them to their rooms, but with a bonus. You begin to add consequences for their arguing and fighting, which are intended only to make arguing and fighting less fun for them. These are not punishments. You might remove a number of favorite toys, for example, to a box in the garage while they watch you do it, or take their phones or video games, depends on their age, for a day or two. You'll come up with consequences. Use your imagination. The point is never to punish them, which you're always doing if you're annoyed, but to simply remove the fuel from the fire of excitement they feel when they argue. As you increase the consequences and as they stay alone in their rooms, invariably they acquire a genuine desire to work things out. They do. Now remember, all these steps are integrated. Although listed in sequence, they're all related, and you might need to alternate between them or change the order or do more than one at a time. Step 1, for example, love them, always accompanies the other steps. If possible, teach all these steps before you begin implementing them, before the next argument or fight. You might say, quote, "Here's what we're going to be doing from now on," end quote. And then explain what will happen if there is any arguing or fighting. Explain the steps and say that they're going to happen immediately and every time. The steps are the same regardless of age, although the language you use would be tailored to their understanding. You can even teach pre-verbal children how not to scream their disagreement. Does this actually work? Uncounted thousands of parents around the world have followed these steps, and they report that if they actually do them, they always work. One mother consistently followed these principles with her young children, and after a short time, she wrote to me and said this, quote, "My 8-year-old son Bruce was in his room reading, and Bonnie, age 6, was pestering him with questions and requests that he play with her," end quote. Now, we all know where this usually goes. Bruce would say, "Stop bothering me." Bonnie would say, "I'm not bothering you. You're ignoring me," and on and on. It gets worse by the second. But Bruce had been consistently loved and taught by his mother. So he calmly said, quote, "Bonnie, I'd like to be alone." Bonnie said, "Okay." She walked out, closing the door softly while Bruce said, "Thanks, Bonnie." The disagreement and potential conflict were over. This is stunning. And you can teach your children to feel and behave like that instead of arguing and fighting. If you want to stop the arguing and fighting of your children, of course you have to set the example. You can't express anger at them or anybody in the home. And then you have to be consistent with the steps that we've discussed. They work. Click below to learn more about how to address your own anger and how to stop the arguing and whining and fighting in your home.